This is crazy to get up at this early on a Saturday morning and gather all dressed nicely. You guys look like a church crowd practically. Thank you all for coming out this morning. I think you all know this is an incredibly special event right here. The people who know it's special are the people who are here. The people who are missing it are missing something really important. So thank you for coming. I'm David Lovegrove. I'm the new director of the Greer Heritage Museum. If I have not met you, I would love to. There are exciting things happening here at the museum. COVID, as for most museums, took a toll on us. We lost a lot of our volunteer base, which was painful, but we are rebuilding. Have a great group of new volunteers, still could use more. If you're interested in helping out a museum, we'd love to have your help. We are building new exhibits and things, so sorry about our construction zone over here as we are constructing the Greer Theater, which was the second great theater in Greer. And so I've been immersing myself in research on entertainment in Greer, and just to throw out the trivia, the first movie, what they called electric theater, the first movie shown in Greer was shown in 1901. That is unbelievably early. It was shown on the second floor of the Davenport building, and it cost 15 cents to watch in 1901. So we complained about the price of movie tickets. Well, they were steep long ago. So anyway, come back. We'll have an opening event for this. That whole marquee is actually brilliant neon, and we've got it turned off until the exhibit opens. We'll have a lot of new artifacts and some wonderful information there. So there may well be some of the people who contributed financially to this exhibit here, and if that's the case, thank you very much. Okay, let's get down to why we're actually here. Is there anyone here who came not having heard of Dean Campbell prior to this event? Is there anyone who didn't know? Okay, that's great. Probably a third of the crowd. So I could introduce Dean Campbell, or I could just let you hear from him, because hearing him is an introduction in itself. I cannot do him justice. What you need to know about Dean Campbell is there is an entire Appalachian culture that is unique and distinctive to South Carolina, and it has been shunned. And it deserves, a story deserves to be told. The person who knows more about that untold culture than anyone else on planet Earth is Dean Campbell. He actually stopped speaking several months or years ago, and he has graciously granted us this one incredible opportunity to hear from him again. So I'm not going to take up more of his time. What we're going to do through this is he will speak for about 45 minutes, and then he has asked us to have about 15-minute time for questions and answers. And so have your questions ready. Throughout this, there will be a couple of times where he's going to refer to a documentary that he produced about the Dark Corner, and we'll show you a couple snippets from that. He'll tell you how to purchase copies of that as well. So join me in welcoming Dean Campbell.
If I stagger, it's not because I'm full of moonshine. I'm just full of life, and I've lived too long. Next week I will be 88. I'm glad he mentioned this about the entertainment in Greer. I am old enough to tell you that I first saw my first film in Greer. It was a silent movie with a piano player. And if I remember correctly, Ann Southern was in it, called Maisie Gets Her Man. All right. I'm going to talk to you this morning. Oh, I guess you might wonder, somebody already asked me before you all got here, how did I get the title The Squire of Dark Corner? When I first came back to South Carolina after being away for a full 20 years, I had suddenly noticed that they were widening Highway 11. Highway 11 is now a state scenic highway, but it is also a national scenic byway. It still carries the title Scenic Highway because they didn't want to change the signs. So whenever they widened it, and I thought, oh my goodness, the whole world is going to be coming through my beloved dark corner. And I don't want the same thing to happen to it that happened to the beautiful highway in Arkansas during the Ozarks. In the 1950s, they opened up Dog Patch USA down in Arkansas. And every restaurant had a placemat, have a tall cafe. Everything that they did to promote that was a caricature of the hillbilly. What native Southerners might refer to more as poor white trash. And that was not going to happen to my place. So, I had already done some stories for the state papers and magazines before I ever returned home. But I started a one-man promotional campaign to tell the full story of the Dark Corner, not just the moonshine and the killings and all of this, but the fact that we produced ministers of the gospel, foreign missionaries. We had outstanding doctors, lawyers, educators. The man who headed up the engineering department of Clemson University for 39 years and was acting president 3 times came from Gallatin. You've heard of multimedia, multinational corporation, headquartered in Greenville, South Carolina. He was born in the Dark Corner. No, people didn't know that because, you see, other people in the state who revere history didn't like the Appalachian culture. And they always are quick to tell you that we're not like them. Every state in the United States that has an Appalachian culture in their mountainous part has assimilated that mountain culture into the fabric of their state, except South Carolina. We were never part of the plantation economy of this state. And I'm here to tell you that there are 3 things that it's important about moonshine. But to finish my story on how I got the title, I was so successful in that one-man campaign that the man who was a feature writer and columnist at the Greenville News and Piedmont, he saw the efforts that I put out and he saw what was happening. People were beginning to talk about something other than the killings and the moonshine. And so he dubbed me the Squire of Dark Corner. I asked him once, I said, Jim McAllister was his name. I asked him, Jim, why did you name me the Squire? Why not the Mayor or some more modern title? I said, you know, in the villages in Wales and in England, the Squire of the village had a little money, but more often than not, he was the village idiot. Jim looked me straight in the eye and said, well. And I looked him straight in the eye and said, but I don't have any money. So, moonshine, it was vitally important to the Dark Corner. 3 major reasons. First, medicinal. On the frontier, there were no patent medicines unless some snake oil salesman came with his wagon. So you had to compound your own medicines. Even doctors compounded their own using moonshine and herbs and spices. Now, my father made moonshine, but my father chartered his whiskey. Now, chartering is done by burning the inside of barrels and kegs so that it's like charcoal. And you put your white lightning into this burned out barrel and you bury it underground so it stays a constant temperature. It will age it and it will turn it the color of a light bourbon. It is much smoother to the taste and much smoother to mix with herbs and spices. So if you want medicinal moonshine, you want chartered. Nobody does it anymore. It's too much trouble, too much work. Now, there is a shorter method of doing it, but that's a secret that my father took to his grave, even though he would never let me learn how to make moonshine. Because he said, my son is going to get an education. He is not going to have to depend upon moonshine to make a living. And so when I tell my classes that, some smart aleck in the audience always said, well, how do you know so much about making it? And I said, he forgot to tell his younger brother not to tell me. All right, medicinal. Second, cultural. This was an Appalachian culture made up of Scots-Irish and borderline England immigrants that came to this country. And they came with a firm conviction that just as they did in the old country, they did here when they got to America. They had a God-given, inalienable right to make their own water of life. And that's what whiskey was called, water of life. Now in America, they made it with a new grain that they found, that the Indians had, maize. We call it corn. And to be fully good moonshine, you can mix some other grains with it, but it must be primarily corn to be moonshine. But third, and most important, the third reason was economic. I said earlier we were never part of the plantation economy up here in the mountainous portion of the state. We had a barter society with the western North Carolina and eastern Tennessee area, the other Appalachian areas here. And the thing that made the economic plan for this area work was the legal and illegal distillation of whiskey. Our whole commerce was based on that. Even some of the preachers had their own private 25-gallon copper still and made their own supply for making their own medications. Now, culturally, it was not a sin to drink. It was a sin to get drunk. Okay. So that's why moonshine will always be a very big part of the story of the Dark Corner. Now, we have a very nice museum in Greenville. I served on its board of directors for 6 years and rotated off the year before the building was actually built. But you would think that in Greenville County that there would be a mention of the Dark Corner. There isn't in any permanent exhibit. You can buy my books and some other books on the Dark Corner in their gift shop, but it's not in the exhibits. And even though they're planning to reduce some new ones, we asked for just one mention on the nullification paper. But that hasn't been approved yet. You see, the city fathers of Greer, Greenville, Spartanburg, and all the cities that formed, they elevated themselves with the New South editors after the Civil War particularly by saying, we're not like them. But guess who we sold our whiskey to? The city fathers of this place. And if you don't believe that, I'll tell you a little incident that happened. The first time I made a presentation over to Rolling Green Village in Greenville area, it's a large retirement community. Some of you may even live there, I don't know. But I made the statement that I just did about my father making the chartered whiskey for medicinal purposes. After it was over, several people came up to ask questions. And one of the people that came up was a very lovely, white-haired lady that had the cane that has the 4 legs to it. She patted me on the arm and smiled, and she said, Mr. Campbell, I can attest to the fact that your father made some excellent whiskey for the distant past. She said, I'll have you know, I have had many a spring tonic made with your father's good chartered whiskey. And then she said, you see, my husband was Judge C.C. White. And I thought for a moment, and patted her on the arm and smiled. And I said, yes, Mrs. White, and it was your husband who put my father on probation for making it. Also, at that same meeting, as I was setting up, at the time we didn't have this. We had just a carousel and slides and pictures. As I was setting up the equipment, a willowy fella entered. I recognized him immediately, although I had not seen him for 30 years. It was my father's former probation officer. He was looking for me. The last time I saw him, I was living in California, and I came home for Christmas for a week. And my mother said, son, I hate to ask you to work while you're here, but since you've done some brickwork as a young man growing up, I'd like to raise my hearth by the level of 2 brick. Will you do that for me? And I said, sure, Dad will carry hod for me. So he did. I'm down on my knees and I'm working with the bricks and the mortar. There's a knock at the door, and it's Mr. Now, Buddy Now. He had not seen my father in well over a year. But back in those days, and I'll tell you something about the moonshine guys, if they said, I will show up and turn myself in at a certain time, they would do it. You didn't have to go looking for them. They were a man of their word. But anyway, while he's sitting there and talking with my dad and just visiting with the family, he was about ready to leave, and I said, oh, Mr. Now, I have a question for you. I said, don't you think it's a bit unusual that the fellow that sits on the grand jury over at the courthouse in Greenville this session is still on probation for making illicit whiskey? And he looked at me and he said, what? I said, yeah. Matter of fact, they just elected Dad the foreman of the grand jury. He didn't say anything, but 2 weeks later there was a written pardon in the mail from the government. How did the dark, well, where is the dark hunter, first of all? If you have seen a map of the county of Greenville, it is large at the top and dwindles down almost like a key on its edge. You have Greer, Greenville right in the center of it. Greer is up going toward North Carolina. And Simpsonville is down going south toward Columbia. The northeastern corner of Greenville County, which juts right against Spartanburg County on the east, North Carolina on the north, other townships in Georgia on the west, and of course the rest of South Carolina on the south. That nucleus, that's the nucleus of the dark corner, the Glassy Mountain Township. Because the Spartanburg County and Greenville County line, as it exists today, that is the old Indian boundary line that was set up in 1755 by the first treaty with the Cherokee. Everything west of that line was Lower Nation Cherokee.
Is that water or Wi-Fi?
I told David, I said, we really missed the point. We should have had this in a jug. All right, since you stopped me with that statement, I will tell you quite honestly, I've taught my class on Dark Corner Furman's Ollie Lifelong Learning Program for 24 years. And usually the first question asked by anybody is, are you going to bring samples? And I said, no, I can't. I don't want to get caught with an open container. But when I do teach the second class, that's on moonshine, And I bring to the class a book from my library, and it's entitled How to Have Courage and Self-Confidence. And I bring it to the class, and I open it up because it has a little lock on the front. I open it up, and it's actually a box, and this is the lid. And I hold it up, and it's a flask full of moonshine with 2 shot glasses. So I do take it out and have my proctor let people smell it. But I also appoint him to keep a look at everybody that smells to make sure they don't sneak a taste. So. All right. That corner is the nucleus. Part of Spartanburg County is the dark corner because the original colony of South Carolina came all the way up from Charleston against North Carolina colony through Spartanburg. That was colonial territory. That and further east was colonial territory. West of that line, as I said, was Cherokee Nation. And people that came in the Great Wagon Road from Pennsylvania through the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia came down into the Piedmont area of North and South Carolina, these Scots-Irish and borderline England people. So a portion of Tryon and Columbus, North Carolina. And then if you go from Glassy Mountain Township, the corner, over to Saluda and Cleveland Township, if you go from here, let's say up to Brevard, once you reach Pickens County or a county in North Carolina, you're out of the dark corner. But the mountainous part up there, that's all considered dark corner. And actually, I'm the first person that ever put that down in print in my first book, the Eyes to the Hills, a photographic odyssey of the dark corner. How did it get its name? The most told story for years was that sometime after the Civil War, a politician from Greenville came up to the dark corner area, and on Dill Road, where Concord School used to be, and where they used to bivouac with the soldiers from Wadsworth, Camp Wadsworth in Spartanburg. See, they moved everybody out 2 years, and so up in there, so that the Wadsworth soldiers could come up and use it for artillery practice against the mountains. And excuse me, got his name. Oh, and he said something that was very unpopular. They had put him in a cart on this muster grounds on Dill Road, and he was orating from up in the cart, being above the crowd. And he said something unpopular, so they had a few of the fellows that didn't like what he was saying, so they came up and lifted away the sandbags that they were holding the thing down and dumped him in the ground. So he dusted himself off and said, "You people up here in the dark, you don't know what's going on." But we found out that's not the way it got its name at all. That would have been after the Civil War in the late 1860s. We had already found 2 deeds of the 1830s that said this is located in that portion of Greer County commonly called the Dark Corner. What? Back in 1830s? Okay. So we had Wade Hampton, who came up and when he was governor, and he made a talk at Glassy Mountain Baptist Church. And he said, "Oh, you people up here do know how you got the name Dark Corner, don't you?" And they said, "Oh, yes, it's a politician." He said, No, you got your name the Dark Corner in 1832. We did, yes. In 1828, Congress passed tariffs that were very good for the industrial northern industries, but were a death knell for all of the southern states that had plantation economies and agrarian society. And so the Constitution, one of the articles, allows states to question the actions of the federal government and to the fact that they can nullify. This has been tried many, many times Unfortunately, every time it has gone as far as the Supreme Court, it's been ruled against, but it is there and people use it. And if you remember about, 10 or 11 years ago, when we first had Obamacare, a number of states wanted to nullify Obamacare. Well, that's the same process. So what South Carolina did, since the vice president under Andrew Jackson at that time was John C. Calhoun from right here in South Carolina, he comes home to South Carolina and talks to our legislatures in the state. And so in 1832, we had the Nullification Act that was voted on in the state. Shall we nullify these tariffs and not be governed by them? And when the state voted, 82% of the state said yes, nullify. But in the dark corner, the precinct at that time was called Mason's Box. And the vote was 169 to 1 against nullification. What's this? A strong unionist stronghold up there in the middle of all these other Southerners? Yes. Because you see, our very first settlers were Revolutionary War soldiers who were not paid during the war. They were, if my phone goes off, forgive me. They were not paid during the war, but they were issued a piece of paper called an ident. And beginning in 1794, they exchanged those idents for land grants on Glacier Mountain. So here are these Revolutionary War soldiers who had put their lives on the line for this country to be formed. And they didn't want to start seeing us tearing apart that quickly. And so they said no to nullification. Leave things the way they are and work together. So many people who are in the dark corner now, their families have been there all these years, and they don't know that we were a unionist stronghold in the middle of all of this. Okay? So you know where it is, how it got its name, and now what is it? If you look to the Dark Corner Facebook page, Kelly Jane O'Hara, who is originally from New York, but she lives here now, she is the moderator. That page was set up when we did our documentary of the Dark Corner back in 2008 and showed it at the Upcountry History Museum. We were only going to show it the 4 Sundays in August 2008. But when we showed it the first Sunday, it got such a tremendous acceptance that we had to cancel things and show it 13 times. And then 6 months later, we had to self-curate the first visiting exhibit for the visiting thing over there, called From Traveler's Rest to the Dark Corner. And it garnered more attention than anything that museum has ever done. There are people even now who will call up and say, is the Dark Corner exhibit still running? Hopefully someday there will be a Dark Corner part of that exhibit. Even on the nullification wall, all about nullification for South Carolina, it doesn't, they can't even put a little one-line thing there that says one area in Upper Greenville County was so unionist stronghold that it got its name, Dark Corner, because the light of nullification will never shine in that corner of Greenville County. I'd like to do something right now. If you would you play the prologue to our thing here? The reason I'm doing that is because, number one, I'm running out of breath here. But number two, you'll see me without the beat.
Hot August Sunday morning, 1891. Folks were arriving for worship at Mountain Hill Church on the top of Glassy Mountain. Richard Gosnell was walking from his buggy to the church building with a bottle of wine to be used in the communion service. He was stopped by Joshua Howard and accused of insult for not speaking. Gosnell made no reply and walked into the church. Joshua Howard took out a pistol and shot towards him. This was a signal to Joshua's brother Messina Howard and the other Howard brothers to renew their standing feud with the Gosnell family. Shots rang out from all directions. Luther Durham attempted to arrest Joshua for disturbing public worship. Joshua resisted him and commenced firing, shooting Luther in the bowels and in the mouth. Friends of both families joined in the shooting fray. Witnesses later stated that at least 50 shots were fired. Messina Howard died on the site. Joshua, two of his brothers, and a Howard family friend, Sherman Bridgman, were wounded. Joshua died the following day. All of the others survived their wounds. The killing of Messina Howard at a church was a never-before-witnessed occurrence of lawlessness and tragedy, one of many in this mountainous region. The killing of Constable Holland Howard in a distillery on Chestnut Ridge. The burning of the Hensley home under suspicious circumstances, killing the entire family. These and other tragedies delineated the dark corner for generations. Is it any wonder that for over 150 years, few people would claim to live there?
The dark corner has been known for moonshine, primarily, ever since it became inhabited. But we have an educational legacy in the dark corner that goes all the way back to 1809. A land grant of 837 acres after the Revolutionary War was given to a man named Robert Goodjoin, J-I-O-N. There is a Goodjoin Road that goes from Little Chicago in Spartanburg County up to Highway 14 and then to Highway 11. And it's called Goodjoin. But somebody at the courthouse or went someplace just looked at it wrong and called it Goodjoin instead of Goodjoin. It was the road to the Goodjoins. And the land grant, the man built the Goodjoin Meeting House right on Highway 11, where the Goodjoin Road and Tougaloo roads come together into Highway 11 in the middle of a curve. And that's where my house sits, right where the Goodjoin Meeting House was. It was not only a Goodjoin meeting house for the community to meet for any kind of stuff they needed to discuss, but it was also called Brown's Schoolhouse. Squire Wiley Brown was a former teacher, and he paid for the school, and he paid another woman to help him teach the local children, and they taught them in the Goodjoin Meeting House. Then in 1809, there was a new group of Baptists that were a mission arm out of ahead of Tiger Church up in Tigerville, and they began meeting there. So the 200-year history that I just did for Gownsville Baptist Church actually is a 212-year history because they began as a mission arm in 1809. And they met there until years later, Robert Goodjoin built a new meeting house across the road, and he also gave a deed to the church group, who at that time had formed themselves as Crossroads Baptist Church, because the Tougaloo Road and the Upper Warriors Trail, which is Highway 11, was a major crossing. Billy Walker, who was from Spartanburg, and was known for his shaped note singing called Southern Harmony. And he used to write his name ASH on the end, like MD. That stood for Author of Southern Harmony. And he used to conduct singing schools around the churches. And he came to this group that was meeting in the Good Giant Meeting House. And he said, "Oh, you people have never had a building of your own." And they said, no, we've always met in the meeting house. So 1 year later, he saw fit to give the church group 5 acres of land a mile down the road, right at the crossing of the Rutherford Road and the Upper Warriors Trail, which is Gallonsville now, the crossing in good place, and to build their own church building. And that's where you see the big white church up on the hill now that was built in 1913. So, from that, you will find that there are no Presbyterian churches up there. There is Methodist and there is Baptist. And in this documentary, there is a section on moonshine where Anne McEwen, who, by the way, wrote the best book of all of us, it's about this thick. She went back to the original land grants to all of the land on those upper townships and traced ownership all the way up to 1900. Because you see, her mother was Register of Means Conveyance, Registrar of Deeds for many years, and she used to come home from school and go to her mother's office and start looking up records as a young girl when she was in high school. So she has a big, thick book that's called Including a Pile of Rocks, which is wording from a deed from our original ancestor, Abner Center, who bought the land up on top of Glassy Mountain. And that's the big thing of rocks you see if you go up the cliffs at Glassy Golf Course on the mountain. Those rocks. All right. Let's see. I'm trying to think of the questions that most people ask when I first start. Anyway, I need to tell you this. I talk about the Scots-Irish and the borderline England people. The Scots-Irish were Scots who went over to Derry, Ireland, Northern Ireland, because they were better workers than the Irish, and the English lords who owned the big farms in Ireland, they brought the Scots over to work their farms because they were better workers than the Irish, who were drinking too much of their own Irish whiskey. And in Ireland, they had not only the Catholic Church, but the Anglican Church. And the Presbyterian Scots didn't like that. So when they had some droughts and everything else where they were in arrears to the king for taxes on land that they were trying to buy from him, they decided to come to the New World, get away from the Catholics and the Anglicans of Northern Ireland, and also work off what they owed the king as an indentured servant once they got here, which is what happened with Thomas Campbell Sr., my ancestor, who came in 1747. And the borderline England people, they wanted to get away from the Anglican Church because they were Calvinist, Baptist, and Methodist. But to be married and recognized, they had to be married in the Anglican Church. Didn't like that, so they came to the new colony. When they got here to Chester and Philadelphia, they couldn't go down to Tidewater, Virginia, because that's where the Anglicans settled. They couldn't go down to Maryland because that's where the Catholics settled. So they liked the Quakers. And they went west to the mountains of Pennsylvania, and then they started down through Virginia and started south. That's the route that they took. So, when Anne is on camera, she says, when I was doing my research up there, She said, I suddenly realized there are no Presbyterian churches in Upper Greenville County, and there never have been. So how can we say that we had Scots-Irish? You see, she forgot to look at it culturally. For just the reasons I told you, they came that route. And while they're coming that route, the Scots Presbyterians couldn't have any kind of pastor in the frontier. Because in the Presbyterian church, then as now, you cannot preach unless you are seminary trained. And Scotland had not produced enough seminarians to have one out on the frontier. So, the borderline England people, many of them were Calvinist Baptists who also believe in an elect very similar to Presbyterian. So when they intermarried on the way down, they just simply became Calvinist Baptists and no longer Presbyterian. See? All right. We also, I mentioned the educational thing going back to 1809. It also included not only public schools, but we had 2 private schools in Gallinsville. The foremost educational institution in this upper part of South Carolina, particularly the western part, was the Gallinsville Seminary, it was called, or some people refer to it as the Earl Seminary. It was a school that actually, in effect, was a 2-year college, like a junior college. They would come and board in the community and take the 2 years of courses and then go to a 4-year institution and get their degree in 2 years. It went from 1858, and then it stopped operation the year after Reverend Earl died in 1889. Then, 1892, the Greenville Association, split into North Greenville and Greenville later, they decided that they needed a school in that area that offered better and more training and so forth. And so they established the North Greenville High School, which quickly became North Greenville Academy, and not too many years down the line became North Greenville Junior College, and then became North Greenville College, and in a few years ago became North Greenville University with 2 or 3 satellite campuses, and their baseball team won the championship last night. I wish I could have seen that game because I know some of the fellows that are on the team. So I guess people away from here will start learning a little more about the dark corner. See, there's 1 or 2 other things I wanted to cover with you, and then outstanding doctors, lawyers. I mentioned Sam Earl with Clemson, his brother Baker, who was a doctor in Greenville and was the physician for Furman University for many years. And if you go onto the Furman University campus now and see their beautiful infirmary, it is named for him. Bonnie Hampton Peace, the Peace Center in Greenville, performance of the performing arts. The museum itself was finalized and finally was built by the very generous contribution of Mary Peace Sterling, and that was a favorite thing of hers. So you've had a number of things. I do one lecture on outstanding aristocratic and commoner families of the Dark Corner. And I talk about the original Bowdens and the Earls and people like that of aristocratic stock. But then I also talk about the Howards and the Centers and the Lindsays and the Emerys and people like this who didn't have all of those things behind their names and their backgrounds. And you'll find that you won't be related to just one family up there. When you talk to somebody, you'll find that, yes, you're related to that family and that family. It's amazing the number of families that I'm related to. If I could sing, I would do you the ballad of the killing of Holland Howard. But we won't try that because we had the 100th anniversary last Saturday of the school building in Gallorsville that is now the community center building. It was rebuilt in 22 of brick because the wooden building that was both a combination elementary and high school burned in 1921. And the very first stage that I ever acted and sang on is the stage upstairs on the second floor of that building. And coming up to meet me, I was sitting at a table back against the wall, and coming up to meet me at age 91 and spry as a spring chicken was the girl that was in the 6th grade that I had to play opposite, and I was in the 3rd grade. See, I had just shown up at Gallorsville that fall. And when we did the Christmas play called Johnny and Jack, the young boy in the 6th grade that was playing the lead role suddenly got diphtheria. And I had to learn his lines and practice the play and learn the song and do it in 5 days. And so I was chosen the 3rd grade because I could memorize faster than anybody else in the school. I had just made 2 grades in 1 year at O'Neill School up here. So coming to meet me last Saturday was my leading lady. And she bent over to hug my neck and kiss me. And I said, "Do you remember Johnny and Jack that we did together on the stage upstairs?" And she said, "Barely." She said, "That was a long time ago." And I said, "Sure was. But if you will allow me, I would like to sing for you the song that I sang to you in the show." She said, "You still remember that?" And I sang it, every word and every note. And she said, "How in the world did you remember that all these years?" And I said, "Because after that show was over, I made the title of that song one of the watchwords of my life." She said, "You did?" And I said, "Yeah. You never gain a thing unless you try." That, in combination with the motto that my graduating class in 1951 at Campbell adopted: "Learn as if you would live forever. Live as if you were to die tomorrow." I firmly believe in every one of those. So I'm going to leave the thing up now for questions. I'd like you to play the epilogue, just because it's dramatic.
The Dark Corner, an area that for so many years, 150 or more, was known as an elusive place. Blanche Marsh wrote a chapter in her book, That Elusive Dark Corner. For a place that you could never find because it was always a little place further up the road. There is a difference in Dark Corner today. Perhaps you can say that we have flip-flopped. We have gone from being an elusive place to a very exclusive place. But people change, times change, And we've become more sophisticated. And all of those years of the coat of the hills, of the moonshine, which, by the way, still goes on in very limited amounts, we look for something better for ourselves. Thank goodness many of the people who have come from the outside world to the Dark Corner recognize the gem that is the Dark Corner. And they have taken a leadership role in helping us, the natives, to preserve what's here. Because let's face it, we want to offer it to future generations. Some people might say that now we are the exclusive Dark Corner. Exclusive in 3 ways. We have 3 exclusives for the state of South Carolina in the Dark Corner. We have the state's oldest bridge, 1820. We have the sole surviving covered bridge, Campbell's, built in 1909. And we have the state's only mountaintop golf course. Now, there are others that are on the mountainside or mountain valley, but this one is mountaintop. We have a wonderful North Greenville University in the Dark Corner, which began as a high school for children of the Dark Corner and now has become a major institution of learning in the state of South Carolina and the region. So that we are no longer dark in Dark Corner. The light of enlightenment, shall we say, has touched us. What does the future hold? Who knows? But as we've done for generations, we all believe in the creator of this Dark Corner.
I like that exit because that is my father walking out of the picture. I started out in life looking exactly like my mother's brother. I'm going to go out looking exactly like my father. How do we change while we're living? I don't know. All right, question.
Sir, I believe that the Dark Corner also is unusual in having harbored a lot of abolitionist sentiment.
Having what?
Harbored a lot of abolitionist sentiment in support of the Underground Railroad due to the
true.
presence. I have specifically heard from just a number of descendants of Solomon Jones, and he was a noted abolitionist and supported the Underground Railroad on his road up to Jones Gap. I'm very interested in looking into the history of that and the reality of that. Do you have any suggestions, sources I might see?
You won't find that much that has been produced here. You Google it for people from out of the state. And the reason for that goes back to this great divide between nothing is important historically if it didn't come out of Charleston. So that we have, that's why there's so much that's been done on just Dark Corner, because we're not going to let this die. We're going to tell the story. But what you say is true. Yes, there was support of the railroad. The abolitionists and so forth. But somebody needs to do that. I agree with you. But I can't think of any, certainly not in this state. And I've not had time to pursue that. But with all the things that they've got now, Google it, Bing it, whatever.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question too. So during the Civil War, when the South was seceding, Dark Corner did not want to. Is that correct?
Well, I'm not a great lover of Civil War history. I wouldn't be because I'm from the Dark Corner. Because you see, a number of our boys during the Civil War, and some of my neighbors don't like to hear this, but many of our boys up there did not fight for the Confederacy because they said it is a rich man's war but a poor man's fight. I said we were never part of the plantation economy. We had no connection with them other than disdain. And so I'm proud of the ones that did serve because they believed in their cause and they served, but not all of them did. I tell you what, though, in Gownsville during the Civil War, where Gownsville really began, the little community above the South Packlet River at a trading post that was set up by Gowan, who was the commander of Fort Gowans, the Revolutionary fort further over. Let's see. Ask your question again.
Well,
I had a particular point I wanted to cover a bit.
I thought that they were kind of like anti-secessionists.
Oh, and secession, right, yeah. Anyway, what happened was, we had that feeling, but a lot of our fellows did go and didn't come back. Now, Faith Campbell came back, had to walk all the way from Ohio, because all the railroads had been shot up and whatever. He had to walk all the way back. Didn't even have a horse. But, yes, there were people that were not for secession, because we still had that strong Union influence that's been up there through all the things that we've had. There was another point, though, I was going to make when you first asked it. It has eluded me, but other questions, and maybe that'll come back. Oh, my goodness, did I cover that?
This is not the good question you guys could probably ask.
By the way, I have a handout here that talks about how you can get my books and so forth. Hopefully, we are going to be able to set up something that the museum here is going to be an outlet for my books later on. We just haven't worked out things on that yet. Yes?
I got a question. Can you tie Little Chicago with the Glassy Mountain area up there? The Little Chicago area in Spartanburg. Tie Little Chicago with the Glassy.
See, well, Little Chicago was not in the Dark Corner. No, not at all.
But it was very important.
Well, yeah. Not so much for the Revolutionary period, but Civil War period in a sense, yes, very definitely. And I do hope that they get the project going and replace the big pole that so many miles here and there that Boomer Williams had. Yeah, I agree. And that was a very historical area. It just wasn't. It goes back to Revolutionary times. But yeah.
A big export point for our liquor.
Yeah. Matter of fact, I mentioned earlier that Good Join Road comes from Little Chicago. Little Chicago got its name because there were several killings back in the 1920s. And it got so bad there for a while that one fellow made the observation that, so many people are getting killed around here. I'm going to expect to see Al Capone walk around some of these days. And so people began to refer to it as Little Chicago. But Good Join, people now who want us to tell you that the way it got its name was the jugs that were made down at Jug Factory Road, and that's where all of our clay products were done up here, and down in Edgefield in this state. So that's where the jugs were made, and the moonshine was made up in the Dark Corner, so the two of them together made a Good Join.
Oh.
But that's not the way it was. Good Giant.
Dean, there's a question here.
Oh.
This is a general thing, but you mentioned researching in Charleston being the be-all, end-all. Would you recommend a certain other place to go when you're trying to research details about family and so forth?
Well, now, there is, and I can furnish you copies of a bibliography that I give out the first class that I teach, whether it's Wofford, Clemson, or Herman, or whatever. And that is every other person that has written a book that has in it something about Dark Corner is on that bibliography list. Also, I'll have some cards. Oh, I didn't put them out. They're in that case. David, could you get in that case around on the other side? There is a little stand that's got cards in it. You put that out. You can take a card, or you'll have the paper that we'll give out a little bit later here. That if you go on my website, yes.
But Anne McEwen's book, I think you told me, is good about that too.
Oh yeah, Anne McEwen, bar none, has the best book. If you are interested in who the families were and the interrelationship between families and entrepreneurs and things like that, Anne's book is definitely, I would recommend it. Matter of fact, somebody that I was in contact with this week, was it you, Sam?
Yeah.
That you looked up on Amazon and it was $80.63.
$95 on Amazon, you can get it for $1 or $45.
Yeah. Yeah. But now, if you what did you contact Susanna?
Yeah, sure did.
And how much is she selling for?
45.
45. Yeah. Well, that's 40 in shipping. That's what it's always been. Yeah. But if you go onto my website, to squireofdarkcorner.com, and you click on Books and DVDs link, it will take you to my production site. And the reason I tell you my regular website than the production one is because it's named for my horse, and it throws people. Tamazar Productions. And when the books are described, I describe my own books, but I also give you the names of the books of other people and the authors and how you can get in touch with them to purchase their books. So it's a living biography. Yes, way back there. I hope I can hear you.
Yeah, Dean. So I think you just answered my question. For those who might be interested in the everyday life, the home remedies, the sweeping of the dirt yards, all of the cooking. I know one time on the Dark Corner Facebook page, they asked a question about your grandmother's cooking. I think there were 175 comments. It was amazing. So that's another good source, I guess, the Dark Corner Facebook page. And
yes.
Whatever you would suggest.
Yes. Now, my Twice Told Tales, there are 150 of them. I did them as a column twice a month for 6.5 years. And the publisher of the paper, Crown Daily Bulletin, it publishes twice a week now, like most daily papers. The publisher called me after we showed the premiere of this documentary, and he said, "We'd like for you to do 2 columns a month on the Dark Corner." And I said, "What would you like me to write about?" And he said, "Anything that comes to your mind, Dean Campbell. You are the closest thing to E.F. Hutton that I've ever found." And he actually said that because I did a talk later, and he was sitting on the floor because he came late. And I said, "Can I tell them what you told me?" And he said, "What did I tell you?" I said something about, and he said, "Oh yeah," I said. Anyway, pardon me. I sold them the first publication rights to every column that I did. But I maintained the copyright myself so that I could put them in the books. My 2 Tales books, this was the first. And it's called Twice Told Tales of the Dark Corner, which was the name of the column that I did. And the first 72 tales are in this book, the one that has a picture of me with the cap. The last 78 are published in this book. Now you notice that there's not much difference in the size of the books, but you can't see it from where you are, but the type is larger. Because so many of my readers, as a columnist, were people that were up in years. And when they bought the first book, and by the way, the first time I published this, the inside back cover had a pocket with a CD of the old ballads, because I include words and background of the old ballads we used to sing, many of them. So that had, but I had people that wouldn't buy the book because they don't use CDs. So when I reprinted this one, I reprinted it with, I just named the song that we did. There is not anything mounted in them. If you want that, I can have some pressed for like $5 or something. But this has larger print so that people can read it easier. Hand me the photograph. This was the first Dark Corner book that I published back in 1994. And this is actually what I presented with a carousel projector and slides with other pictures and so forth. And people said, oh, I wish you'd put these in a book. Well, finally I did. Poinsett Bridge, for instance, and all kinds of things. What this actually is 18 photographic essays put together. And they have a lot of history in it, but it shows the scenic beauty of this. Anyway, I drove my manuscript and all of my pictures and slides up to Appalachian State University because I wouldn't trust FedEx or UPS not to lose them, because some of these things no longer exist and it's the only picture that is in. They had a consortium that they used to get grant money and they would publish certain things. And I was hoping they had grant money that they could publish this for me. It was reviewed by their 3 learned professors, and 2 of the 3 had an opinion that I didn't like. They said, we don't have any grant money, but if we did, there is one section that would have to come out. And I said, which one? And they said the one called Go Tell It on the Mountain. It shows 27 churches. Go tell it on the mountain that Jesus Christ is born. Because that's very much part. And I said, why would that have to come out? And I was told in 1994 by learned professors at Appalachian State University that the church had nothing to do with Appalachia. And if they were teaching the kids that in 94, I shudder to think what they're teaching them now. Well, it's tearing down statues. Just so you'll know, there are other things. The handout for you too. I won't go back to the other part as far as I showed you guys before. But as far as Dark Corner is concerned, this was the first book I worked on with Dark Corner. This is Jim Howard's book. He was the man that knew the whole thing. It was his father that was killed in the distillery. So Jim was very definitely the historian with Dean Crane. Dean Crane was on the board of directors for Furman University many years, actually died my senior year at Furman. And when Jim finally wrote this and had it, getting it ready for publication in 1980, his wife Ruth had a heart attack. And she couldn't help him edit it, whatever. So he came to me and he said, I need help. So I not only edited this for him and handled the printing and everything else, but I do all of the drawings that are in it, and many of my black and white photographs are in here. Matter of fact, this drawing of the cabin, it's a small cabin, and this is the cabin that Captain Thomas Howard, who fought the Battle of Round Mountain and was his ancestor, he said, oh, I wish that somebody had a photograph of that old cabin. I remember the cabin as a small boy. It was falling down then. And I said, well, Jim, I'm not an artist, but describe it to me, and I'll try to draw it. So when I drew this, he said, that's close enough. And that's what he wanted on the cover. So this was my first thing to work on with Dark Corner. This was my second. And this was done not as a moneymaker. It was done to establish myself as a Dark Corner historian and writer. Okay. Then I did the Twice Told Tale books. Since then, I've done two other things that was just for the family and close friends. I first did a drawing book, just had my portrait that I wrote from age 12, my first published poem, to age 20, when I graduated Furman and was commissioned in the United States Navy at graduation. Only one in the history of the school to do that. And it's my growth as a poet and as a boy growing into a man. After that was done and out of print for a number of years, back a year, 3 years ago, people came to me and said, look, will you redo this, but this time put pictures in it. So this one is now the same poetry, but the treatment of it has been revised, and there's pictures starting with my very first one, the day they cut my curls off, to the fact of when I was sworn in as a naval officer. Two other things I can mention. I did a centennial history for West Monroe Baptist Church with Dr. David Hayes, who was not a writer, but he did most of the research. And I went up and worked with him in Monroe, North Carolina, and I wrote the history for them. This is the latest book that actually I wrote just before I had my 5 bypass surgery. It says 1820, 2020, but actually it's a 212-year history. We started as the mission arm in 1809. And this, by the way, is available only as a donation to the church. It's not a book for sale. Because if they sold it, we'd have to get a tax number and charge tax and everything else. So I'll give you on the sheet or on my card. Contact the church itself. All right. Other than prices, this is still $15. These are $20 each, Tales books. This, by the way, is available right now from the Greater Gownsville Association. They have the rights to reprint it, as a fundraiser. And they've just printed some, and they have at least 200 copies left. And this, I think I have probably 50 copies left. So, and that's only $10. Okay, I guess that's it. I don't have them for sale today. I apologize for that because I wasn't strong enough to bring them down, and I didn't have anybody to help me bring them. But we will have them available through the museum later. But I'm giving out the cards if you want them up here. And where's the sheet that we had?
The sheets are in the back.
Okay, all right. Well, either get the sheet or get it up here, and you can contact me and just send me a check and make sure I have the mailing address and so forth, and we will fill the order. I leave you with one thought. Respect heritage. That's what I sign in every one of these books. I don't care if it's making moonshine or preaching a sermon or doing doctor work or whatever. Respect your heritage.